decided that we would actually put that functionality into our firewall technologies. And so through that, we have become a very significant player in the SD-WAN market space. And we're having just tons of conversations about this technology and thought it might be one of interest to the group. And so I hope you guys enjoy this. Just a little bit about our team locally. I'm a Fortinet account manager based in Richmond. I also have on the phone my SE, Rodney Rose. We actually have probably close to 20 account teams throughout the state of Virginia. So whether you're on this call and you're a large enterprise, a commercial, a K through 12, healthcare, whatever it might be, we've got folks that certainly be happy to speak to you. And I think we have a good group of people and a good corporation, and very proud of what we do. So thank you again for your time. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. He can introduce himself real quick, and then we'll get on with the show.
All right. Thank you, Johnny. You guys can hear me okay? Everything's good on the audio?
Sound great.
All right. Let me go ahead and find the share button here. So I'll share. All right, so like Johnny said, Stephen Watkins. I work for Fortinet as well. And what my role is at Fortinet is I direct a team of SD-WAN architects for a global architecture team. So I'm in Virginia Beach. I know you guys are out west, so hope everybody's keeping safe. But really wanted to talk to you about SD-WAN, more specifically secure SD-WAN. So it's the slides here. So I want to start out with a little bit of just a high level definition. And I read an article recently off of SDX Central. So if you're not familiar with SD-WAN or you want to learn about SD-WAN, SDX Central is a really good resource, vendor agnostic. Certainly have ads and run stuff on there, but really good, kind of agnostic opinion about different solutions, different capabilities. Really good resource to check out, sdxcentral.com. But they posted this article and it just kind of gave an overview of what is SD-WAN. SD-WAN, and I'm not going to read this to you, but SD-WAN is basically, a bunch of pre-existing kind of capabilities that were repackaged, improved, and really kind of optimized to kick off a new market, right? And so when you think about WAN link load balancing, old terminology. When you think about health checks, that's old school. Application identification's been happening for 20 plus years, right? So all these things aren't necessarily new, but what the SD-WAN market did was really bring them together very well, right? So we've been around, the SD-WAN market's been around 5 or so years from an introductory level. You're certainly gone through a couple different generations. First gen was really just pure play SD-WAN. I think we would all call it pure play, but ultimately all of these solutions available today, whether they're Gen 1, Gen 2, or potentially Gen 3, all have WAN path control. WAN path control is, are you able to leverage multiple transports, whether it's private WAN, MPLS, VPLS, on a Metro E, whatever, internet-based connectivity, including LTE, VSAT. So lots of different connectivity models, being able to measure efficacy for those WAN paths, which ones are operating appropriately up to expectations, and then being able to leverage all of that information to inform some logic, or what we would just typically call policy, to be able to make a decision on steering specific applications. And so you have to identify applications as well, and then put all that together and you get what we term dynamic application steering. And that's, boil the ocean of SD-WAN down to a couple different things. And I say this, right? The target outcome is pretty simple, right? Protect application performance and availability. That's really what SD-WAN boils down to. I want this application to be available over multiple WAN paths, and I want to meet a specific performance threshold with regard to, potentially packet loss, latency, jitter, or available bandwidth. It doesn't matter. I want to be able to have it available, meet the performance for my user community, and so that's kind of what SD-WAN is in a nutshell. And so Gartner last year kind of came in and said, well, we're going to redefine these critical capabilities for WAN edge infrastructure. One thing they said in this paper was, well, the vendor space is pretty crowded, right? And so if you look at the SD-WAN space alone, there's over 70. That's 70 vendors in that space. Now, more realistically, if you look at the players in the SD-WAN space, really about 7 or 8. You have your VMware with the VeloCloud acquisition. You have Viptela with Cisco, and you have Cisco ISR. You have Cisco Meraki. You have Versa. Um, CloudGenix, most recently acquired by Palo Alto. Palo Alto was just getting into space natively on their own, and of course, Silver Peak. And so there definitely are others, Ariaka, Cato Networks, but it's a long list. And again, there's over 70 vendors in that space. So SD-WAN is very popular. Um, but what Gartner said, secondly, is these customers are coming to us when they call us for inquiries. They're not just talking about application performance. They're also desiring to see an improvement in security and visibility. And so what this is it's really kind of spinning the SD-WAN market on the WAN edge, saying we want our WAN edge to be more consolidated. We want SD-WAN capabilities. So we want the actual WAN capabilities, the overlay and underlay. We want security, and we also want to improve visibility over at our branches or our retail locations. And then thirdly, they said, security is becoming a differentiator with regard to SD-WAN capabilities. And so that's what we're really going to talk about today is security as a differentiator. What does SD-WAN look like when it has security attached to it? Here at Fortinet, we call that secure SD-WAN. I think we kind of pioneered that terminology, and now the market's adopted it. So we'll talk a lot more about that. But lastly, Gartner identified in this critical capabilities paper 4 use cases. One of them was security sensitive WAN. And so I think Gartner's really kind of attached themselves after kind of pseudo attaching themselves in the initial parts. We really didn't see security as a major requirement in like what I would call like a generation 1 or a gen 1, SD-WAN solution. But now we're starting to see that. We're starting to see early adopters of SD-WAN technology come back to the market and ask for, security. How can I add security to the existing investments that I have as a customer? And there are options, and we'll talk about those kind of as we go along. So I want to start just by kind of wrapping everything up in one little basket here. And so when we talk about legacy WAN and the whole WAN transformation kind of effort that our customers are going through, that everybody in the SD-WAN, markets customers are going through. Everybody's looking at the WAN edge and being able or desiring at some point to reduce costs, right? And so that's a major factor. And I can only imagine after this episode that we're going through now that costs are going to really jump back up to the number one kind of requirement or business outcome that our customers are going to look for when it comes to WAN edge transformation coming out of this health crisis. But legacy WAN was predominantly private WAN. And so as we can see in the diagram on the left, the branch, everything from the branch goes over the MPLS through the data center or the private cloud, through a security stack that exists only in the data center or that private cloud, and then out to the internet where you can reach your IaaS or your SaaS services. And so, again, private WAN, it's very reliable, but probably low bandwidth. It's costly for that low bandwidth. There's no direct internet access, so everything is backhauled, which kind of contributes to poor user experience because they got to go through all the data center or private cloud to get to those SaaS applications that everybody's adopting, right? Office 365, Salesforce, Dropbox, so many different SaaS applications out there that our customers are talking about. But ultimately, they do get security because they pass through that central security stack. And so legacy WAN, while not the best user experience, does provide a level of security, and that's based on what those customers have as part of those central security stacks. So as we kind of continue like a generation one kind of transformation, if you will, we see that organizations have kind of gone on to a hybrid connectivity. So a hybrid connectivity we find most often in organizations who have longer term private WAN contracts with their providers, or those that do appreciate the reliability of an MPLS or other private WAN connectivity, but also want to enjoy the direct internet access. And so they want that multiple path experience where they have an MPLS, they have an internet connectivity. Here it's not labeled with the red connectivity here. It's really kind of short there, but also introducing the overlay network. And so having an alternate path into the data center. So if there's disruption with MPLS, or if you want to reserve MPLS for those really critical applications, real-time voice, video, those sorts of things, and then leverage that IPsec overlay for those less critical applications, but still internal. So lots of different steering use cases in this, specifically the direct internet access or local breakout. You might hear it as referred to as local breakout as well. But you get a little bit better user experience. I mean, let's be honest, most folks go home and they get 25, 50, 100 megabit, even a gigabit at home, depending on where you live and what the options are. Going back into the office the next day, you're back down to 1.5 megabit per second, 5 megabit, 7, 10. And so everybody's user experience is a little bit different than what you would expect at work. And so that's where a lot of we hear a lot of our CIOs come to us and say, I really want to kind of improve that user experience. And so DIA, or adding that broadband connectivity, really helps drive and improve user experience. However, the one thing that lacks in this SD-WAN Gen 1 is security. And so if we look at our paths here, if we go through the MPLS and backhaul, we still get that central security stack. Everything passes through. We're looking and inspecting all that traffic just like we normally would in a legacy WAN perspective. If we go direct internet access, we lose all that security capability. Nothing is being done other than kind of 1996 stateful packet filters. So not exactly what we're looking for when we say secure SD-WAN. So that's what secure SD-WAN is about. Hey, this SD-WAN is really cool. It helps us out. It improves our user experience. It's dynamically moving our traffic around to make sure that we're meeting those application performance thresholds, and we don't even know it. It just does it. It just works. Everything's going great, except we don't have any security for our outbound internet traffic. And so secure SD-WAN, kind of that second gen or 2.5 or 3.0, depending on who you are, really comes into play here. And what that means is again, not just stateful packet filters, right? We don't need to go back 25 years, right? We want security that's today. And so we're talking about advanced security capabilities. So we have that hybrid connectivity model. We still have MPLS and internet. We still have underlay and overlay interfaces. Again, the underlay would be our MPLS and our internet underlay, where our overlay would be that IPsec connectivity between the branch and the data center over the internet. We still have direct internet access or local breakout. We still have the improved user experience, but now we have distributed security at the branch, right? Not only do we take that big security stack and distribute it to each of the branches, but we do it in a way that the policy remains the same no matter which branch you're at. And so we can distribute that and have consistent security policy, full inspection, right? And so we'll look at some of the features that I'm talking about here in just a second, but full inspection right there at the edge. And so even though we're not backhauling through that central security stack, we're still receiving the same services right there at the branch WAN edge. So before we go on, I'll just pause for a second. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw those out. But I want to make sure that we're kind of in a good place to start diving in a little bit more to the secure SD-WAN. But I want to make sure no questions on how we got here. All right, time's up. All right, so what exactly is secure SD-WAN? When we talk about, hey, I want the same sort of protection at the branch edge that I have through my data center or private cloud. I want those advanced security capabilities protecting my traffic from the branch. And you know what? I want my whole branch protected anyway, because I do have a new, an expanded threat surface here at the branch by connecting it direct to the internet versus just private WAN. And so when we look at threat protection, we think of things like next-gen firewall, right? Anti-malware gateways, sandbox capabilities. So, being able to have something that's really going to kind of dive into a sampling of what's coming through that particular branch edge, web filters, being able to, really kind of integrate with an environment where if there's email threats or if there's other threats coming in, coming out, all those things can kind of integrate right there at the branch edge, taking advantage of these security capabilities for threat protection. End-to-end segmentation, really important. So I know a lot of the vendors out there in the SD-WAN space talk about end-to-end segmentation a lot, but one of the things that I always like to point out is segmentation is not just about the WAN. Segmentation has to be about the branch as well. And so, when we talk about retail and PCI, when we talk about banking or finance and other compliance requirements as well, there may or may not be hard segmentation requirements, but logically speaking, those things are introduced. And so being able to leverage segmentation capabilities, not just over the WAN, but also at the branch edge within the branch, separating out those particular bubbles, if you will, PCI, whether it's finance, it doesn't matter. Intrusion prevention capabilities. So of course, if you do have some sort of threat that comes in, being able to pick up that threat and prevent it from proceeding doesn't really happen at a network level, if you have SD-WAN without the security features. And so SD-WAN is just going to pass that traffic with no knowledge because it's not really inspecting that traffic for threats. Secure SD-WAN is inspecting all that traffic and can contribute to inspecting SSL or TSL traffic as well. And you most certainly should look at that because up to 80% or more in some cases of traffic leaving the branch is either SSL or TLS encrypted. And if we can't be able to see in that, at least to untrusted destinations, then we can't inspect it. And if we can't inspect it, we can't have a reasonable level of assurance that we're securing that environment the way that we think we're securing that environment.
So real quick, Stephen, this is Rob Garber. I have a question for you about your SSL TLS encryption. So what kind of overhead are you seeing when you're doing that? Because that's been a huge player in any type of SSL decryption or anything like that. You always run into the overhead associated with that causes it to be an issue.
Yeah, and so industry-wide, I would say it's a challenge. I have to throw a bone out there for my employer, Fortinet. We build our own ASICs processors, and we call it in the branch side, we call it the SOC, system on a chip. to offload those very intense compute to that processor. So we don't necessarily struggle like the others in the space. However, across the space, yes, you enable SSL inspection, and there's a significant performance penalty. I believe the last testing that NSS Labs did across the space, we saw up to a 90% degradation hit in an SD-WAN vendor. It ranged anywhere from, I would say, 50% up to 90% for most of those vendors. And again, just kind of throwing it out there, I mean, we had about 11 to 17% performance hit on our devices, again, because of the ASICs offloading that we do. So it is troublesome for some vendors. But we really feel like that's a huge miss that a lot of organizations overlook. Again, doesn't mean you have to do all the traffic, right? You may choose to not do inspection for those trusted business partners or other trusted vendors. But for traffic where you may not have a trusted relationship with, you certainly do want to be able to provide the same sort of inspection that you would for unencrypted traffic. So it's a key functionality for us that we would say, that I would say as a practitioner, I want to be able to inspect, as much traffic as I can, especially from untrusted, parties. But again, there are some limitations with SD-WAN and secure SD-WAN solutions in place today. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for shouting that out, because that gives me a chance to talk about Fortinet a little bit. But again, from an SD-WAN perspective or secure SD-WAN, 70 plus vendors in SD-WAN, the secure SD-WAN space is much tighter, right? And so I'll mention Versa. Versa's a product out there with secure SD-WAN. Certainly I mentioned Palo Alto. They they introduced some SD-WAN capabilities earlier this year. So, technically they're secure SD-WAN as well, and Fortinet is secure SD-WAN. And so, other than that, I don't know, if there's anybody worthy mentioning from a secure SD-WAN perspective. And what I mean by that is integrated. And so that kind of takes us on to our next slide is, how can we get there? All right, here we go. How can we get there, right? We have architecture options for secure SD-WAN, just like we have for regular SD-WAN. A lot of organizations or a lot of vendors do provide appliances. Fortinet's one of them. Velo has appliances, a lot of appliances. And then there's a lot of virtual capabilities as well. So if you have like UCPE and you want to load just a VNF, you certainly can do that with some vendors. But the first way that you would get, or the primary way that secure SD-WAN comes together is through truly integrated single platforms, right? And so what I mean by that is Versa, they're a competitor, but, Versa has a truly integrated platform with next generation firewall capabilities. Fortinet, next generation firewall, integrated. FortiOS is a single firmware platform that provides, a very comprehensive set of features and functionality, inclusive of next gen firewall with advanced security capabilities, as well as SD-WAN. And again, Palo Alto, they're kind of a new entrant, so there's not a whole lot to speak of other than they do have security and they do have SD-WAN on the same platform. But that's really kind of it when you talk about fully integrated offers, right? And again, with us having the system on a chip or the independent content processor or security processor, network processor, there is an advantage when it comes to the SSL inspection. The kind of man in the middle kind of inspection, if you will. So VNF or service chaining, that's the second type. I'll use VeloCloud as an example. So VeloCloud has devices that can support VNF instances. And so you can actually go into some of the VeloCloud appliances and implement a Palo Alto firewall, a Checkpoint firewall, or a Fortinet firewall on that device. And it specifically spins up on that device. You configure it just like you would a regular Fortinet, Checkpoint, or Palo Alto firewall. And it just leverages the resources that the host allows it to consume. So, or service chaining, you can certainly set up service chaining through different protocols, different means, whether that's just routing or leveraging some sort of ICAP or other protocol. And then the last place, the last opportunity is cloud-based. So, you hear a lot of vendors in the SD-WAN space partnering with those who have full kind of cloud security or firewall as a service models. Zscaler comes to mind. Palo Alto has Prisma. Certainly there are others as well, but that's kind of the third way that you might see secure SD-WAN implemented. Again, that's not necessarily meeting the central management kind of requirement when you look at SD-WAN and simplifying as a requirement. If you look back, or when you get a chance to look back at the first slide, you'll see kind of simplification, central management is one of the tenets of what SD-WAN is supposed to be. And so when you talk about VNF, service chaining, or cloud-based, which is kind of service chaining, right? You kind of leave that behind. And so it kind of, brings a little bit more complexity into play. However, it does serve the purpose of providing secure SD-WAN. One caveat, right? When you use cloud-based, there still isn't anything at the edge of the branch to protect that branch. I know everything's leaving the branch in a tunnel, whether that tunnel is going back to headquarters or data center or private cloud or your firewall as a service vendor. But nonetheless, there's no kind of edge security model in place, I would say. So any questions on the options from an architecture perspective? Maybe what kind of other vendors are out there, again, on the integrated side, Versa, Fortinet, Palo Alto, the VNF, you could, I use VeloCloud as a good example, but there are others, and certainly you can service chain with other virtual instances. And then the cloud side, the two vendors we hear most frequently there are Zscaler and Palo Alto Prisma.
Hey, Stephen, you mentioned there was something earlier about less vendor lock-in on the slide, but in a system like this, do you see that for practical reasons you would need to have a single vendor solution to really get that central management, or has the technology gotten to a point to where they all play well together and you can have mixed solutions for whatever reason? Maybe you had different vendors at different branches right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, I've been in the security business since '96. Yeah, about then. But it used to be defense in depth, and for most, well, not most, but for some customers, especially financials, defense in depth, multi-vendor strategies. In the last 4 or 5 years, I think when I talk to customers, CIOs and CISOs and directors and managers, I think with the environments that we have now, where so much data is generated and taking up so much time from our engineers, administrators, analysts, our customers are really trying to focus on simplifying the management. And so bringing things together. Do things play well together here? Honestly, not really, right? And so when you VNF a Fortinet firewall into a VeloCloud device, that's two management interfaces, two monitoring interfaces. They don't play together at all. whether that's going to be Palo or Checkpoint or Fortinet. You're going to have two devices to manage and two devices to monitor. Same thing. So when you start thinking about the edges and what some customers might have, I've spoken to one customer who has 5 vendors on the edge at each branch. And now they don't have a whole lot of branches, but each branch has 5 vendors with contracts for support and true ups and all that, 7 products from those vendors at each edge. And so being able to communicate, at least from our perspective at Fortinet, we can help consolidate a lot of that, into one solution. And so that's really, I think if we go back and we looked at those requirements, simplification doesn't just mean, putting a new box in, or getting rid of a legacy router and putting in an intelligent router, if you will. Simplification means really kind of simplifying operations as well, and that's deployment and provisioning and continuous management. And cost reduction doesn't only apply from MPLS to broadband, right? Like I said, a lot of folks are maintaining that hybrid, and they're paying for the MPLS just as much as they paid before, but they like the reliability. You don't get that with the internet. Now, you get a lot more bandwidth for a lot less money, but still, cost savings don't just come from there. They also come from consolidation of vendors. And so I do see, I do hear a lot of, customers, CIOs, CISOs, CFOs, really kind of asking questions about, if we do bring in a solution that is more comprehensive and can meet these needs, we're open to having a one vendor solution. Whereas in the past, 10 years prior, that would be a major no-no. You don't want to, put all your eggs in one basket per se. But I think there's a lot more willingness and openness to have those conversations and to validate that solutions are providing the benefits that vendors talk about. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully it answered your question.
No, that was great. I think you hit on a good point about the service contracts. A lot of people forget about that until the second year when that comes around again.
Yeah, it's really a great. I mean, I'll just kind of mention one of our customer use cases. We have a customer in the energy sector, specifically the kind of waste management industry. But anyways, moved over to our solution, moved totally away from private WAN to broadband, saving 20 million a year over 5 years. I'm sorry, 20 million per year for 5 years. So over 5 years, they project they're going to save 100 million. But a lot of that cost is wrapped up into the actual circuits. However, when you look at the solutions that we replaced at the edge, it's kind of along that same thing. And I don't want to get too salesy here for Fortinet. I know that's not the purpose of tonight's call, but really just kind of highlighting, there's more to saving costs than just moving from MPLS or private WAN to public WAN. A lot of costs is also wrapped up into solutions and support contracts and so forth and so on. So it's definitely something to consider when you're looking for a secure SD-WAN solution.
Thank you.
So that's really it. Just a really quick review here. Secure SD-WAN is not becoming. I mean, I don't know why I wrote becoming. It's table stakes today. Like I said, early adopters of SD-WAN are coming back to the table to ask, hey, how can we get the security piece introduced to our existing SD-WAN? So I will share with you that, companies like Versa, companies like Fortinet, and, we're replacing Gen 1 pure play vendors solutions because we do have the integrated. So it's not just Fortinet, it's companies like Silver Peak doing it as well. Silver Peak's winning some business, some takeout business as well. But certainly any integrated security SD-WAN company is going to have an advantage for those early adopters who are seeking an updated or new solution. Gartner recommends considering security as a differentiator. That just really kind of plays into the whole table stakes. You know, it's last we spoke with Gartner, which I think was a couple months ago. The SD-WAN guy relayed, I haven't taken a call in the past 6 months for SD-WAN where security wasn't one of the top 2 requirements. And so, you know, it's just kind of come along that way. The market's come to those secure SD-WAN vendors a little bit more than it was in the past. It definitely, the initial market was just looking for the benefits of dynamic application steering, where now folks are looking for secure dynamic application steering. Of course, the advanced security capabilities, and again, I'm just going to highlight the SSL inspection capability. Certainly want to be able to inspect untrusted traffic. I totally understand the approach on trusted vendors, trusted business partners, you know, but it's risk management. Everybody has their own decisions to make. Delivery options, you know, again, integrated, VNF or service chaining, and cloud-based. And so, you know, there's consumption model for everybody. Certainly one is no better than the other when it comes to providing the secure SD-WAN capabilities, with a couple exceptions, right? One, the SSL inspection capabilities. Some solutions may not perform as well as others. And then secondly, you know, if you are moving to the cloud, you just need to keep thinking, you know, how are we going to protect the branch and not just the egress traffic outside the branch? So there's some things to consider there when choosing what kind of architecture you want to kind of consume, making sure that you're protecting the whole environment and not just, you know, one kind of piece of the environment, if you will. But otherwise, that's all I have from a presentation perspective. Just wanted to reserve some time to be able to answer questions. Happy to share more about Fortinet. Happy to share more perspective on the market in general. But open for questions at this point.
This is Rob again. Real quick, you mentioned earlier about end-to-end trust. And when you say that, do you mean like all the way down to the endpoint, or do you mean just to the branch, to the data center kind of thing? I was just curious, and I was really where I'm going with that is zero trust, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you know, so in the SD-WAN space, end-to-end segmentation really is isolated to the WAN, right? And so what that means is essentially we want to be able to isolate routing domains across the WAN. I don't want to mix routing for my PCI bubble across the WAN with my enterprise traffic. And so, you know, you just use VRFs to be able to separate those things out across the tunnels, if you will. Organizations or vendors do that in different ways. Certainly some have more creative ways to do that than others. But you know, from our perspective, you know, Fortinet, we are a security company, and so we do not only consider, you know, segmentation across the WAN, but we also do want to introduce more segmentation within the branch as well as integration. And so I'm sure most of you have heard the terminology SD-Branch, and so there are vendors in the SD-WAN space who do you know, have SD-Branch solutions. Fortinet is one of them. HPE, right, with their Aruba is another. Cisco is another SD-Branch vendor, and there's others as well. But SD-Branch is kind of the extension of SD-WAN capabilities at the edge into the branch, and so it's kind of bringing the access points and wired switches into the same management framework so that you can manage everything together, deploy everything all at once, and have that kind of integrated environment to where, if security is integrated with it, certainly you can kind of automate some of those detection and response capabilities as you could with Fortinet. And then even as far back to the endpoint, to your question, integrating with those endpoint kind of security capabilities. And so, yeah, tying together that full environment so that you do introduce kind of a zero trust principle, or you can include some of those zero trust principles, even fully maturing to a zero trust architecture as well. So I would say that, probably not part of a SD-WAN conversation, or even a secure SD-WAN conversation for that matter. But when you start talking about secure SD-Branch, certainly the segmentation capabilities and the zero trust principles will come into those conversations.
Cool. That was kind of where I was headed. So I'm glad you caught on.
Yeah, no, it's SD-Branch is kind of the Gen 4, if you ask me. Again, if you think about SD-WAN and simplification, kind of consolidation, we here at Fortinet call that our security fabric. And that really just means we're trying to weave everything together to harmonize, right? Whether it's a Fortinet device or one of our 200 plus partners, we really want that to harmonize so that we can take advantage of what other devices are seeing. Hey, we want to be able to make a policy adjustment at the edge if something's going on the inside of the branch. We want to be able to quarantine a host if something's going on in the inside of a branch. We don't just want to protect the branch from the outside. We want to protect other branches from a malware infected branch. And so having, that kind of security capability at the edge of the branch all the way back in from endpoint to edge visibility really is kind of a benefit. And so when you talk about SD-Branch, those are the kind of conversations you're having is, what do you have in your infrastructure already? And how can we, as security vendors, as secure SD-WAN vendors, how can we leverage what you already have to improve the communication between all these devices, and then automate some of those, low-hanging fruit tasks, right? You don't want to have to respond to every little event. Some of those events are critical, and you want to make sure that there's a response immediately before there is an outbreak. And so being able to potentially, prevent an outbreak from happening, not just at one branch, but at your entire enterprise WAN, because typically there's not a whole lot of security between branch to branch traffic. That's a huge benefit. And so we hear a lot of customers today talking about, not just the edge anymore, but, really inclusive of the whole branch. Anybody else?
Another one about the traffic steering capabilities. Do you find that you have to do decryption to really do that, since a lot of apps are going over HTTPS nowadays? The encrypt everything kind of paradigm that we're going through, and also is there anything coming down in TLS 1.3 that's making that more challenging, or is it just another step in the evolution?
Yeah. Good questions. So what most vendors do for application identification is just a pure layer 4. And so, there's a lot of known IP address port pair matching out there. And so we have, we have the same capability. I mean, it's really, Office 365 has millions of IP addresses that, are known Office 365 IP addresses. And so that's the primary means for application identification in the SD-WAN vendor space. A secondary means, which we have, is deep packet inspection. Because we can, if we don't identify something that comes in on the first packet, right? Everybody says, "Hey, we got first packet match." Well, of course, everybody has the same first packet match because TCP headers all have IP address and port pair in there, and so we all can identify Salesforce.com or whatever. And so that's, that's pretty table stakes. The second piece though is the SSL kind of inspection, deep packet inspection, if you will, looking at the actual application itself. And there's two benefits to that. One, if you miss something, you see it, right? You can identify applications because that's what you do when you see the actual unencrypted data. But secondly, you can actually identify operations, right? And so think in terms of a Dropbox. Dropbox upload and a Dropbox download look the same at layer 4. Right? There's no distinction between an upload and a download. So if you have a particular corporate policy that says, hey, we want to be able to allow our users to download files from Dropbox, but we don't want them exfiltrating data outside of our domain, so we're going to block or prevent those Dropbox uploads from occurring to abide by corporate policy. Not something you could do at layer 4. Certainly something you could do at layer 7 because Dropbox is going to be encrypted just like 80% of the traffic out there. And so there's a couple advantages of being able to do that, and there are a couple different vendors who do that, not just Fortinet. Versa does that as well. But again, there's performance implications there.
Thank you.
Second question, TLS. The second part of that is, as far as I know today, there's only one vendor who is capable of doing deep packet inspection on TLS 1.3, and that's Fortinet.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
Oh yes, I've got a question. Can you speak to like some of the challenges that you've seen or like your customers have seen when they try to adopt it? Like, has it become one of those things where it's more than we bargained for, or, too big for us to choose, so then they, come to you or another, I guess, for support? What kind,
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you talk about WAN transformation, the one thing that comes up the most is kind of, and maybe not the most, one thing that kind of is a red flag for consideration, because it's not an unsurmountable challenge. Asynchronous routing, so multi-hub scenarios or multi-data center scenarios where there is, kind of a ECMP or, multiple paths from each of the data centers, right? And so being able to ensure that there's path resilience, but making sure that those sessions are being able to pass through. Now, some solutions in the space, right, are just intelligent routers, so they don't really care at a whole lot of degree about session. SD-WAN vendors are going to have problems with that, right? Because secure SD-WAN vendors are going to have issues with that because we're session oriented. Being able to make sure that the sessions are coming through the same way that they went out. Other challenges, kind of most of the challenges that we run into from a functional perspective are the difference in setting up SLAs with regard to performance, right? Application performance. Not every branch is equally lucky on the bandwidth side or the reliability side. So we have seen instances where, for instance, a customer will go away from MPLS and switch all their branches over to broadband. And even though they have 50 meg, it's 50 meg in the middle of the weeds. And so that's, high latency 50 meg, high jitter, maybe a little bit of packet loss. And so, there's a little bit of a learning curve, no matter who you're going to choose from an SD-WAN perspective, on setting the thresholds for application performance. And I think I want to say that's a no-brainer, but when you're thinking about all these different things, it's something that kind of, you might overlook. But being able to take into consideration how you want your WAN to perform doesn't mean it's going to be equal or qualitative across all of your branches.
On the other part, I think maybe part of the question around this, Johnny, Stephen, that gentleman may be asking is just like getting it off the ground, so to speak. So, and maybe not, maybe I just misinterpreted, but we always encourage, and I'm sure most people do this, but just if you've got a site or you've got some sort of environment where you can do a proof of concept or lab something up, or something. Most of the customers that, and Rodney and I have firsthand experience working with customers that have deployed SD-WAN. Most folks don't go just hog wild into SD-WAN. They usually have some sort of use case that allows them like I said, either a proof of concept or pick a place or two where you can start.
Yeah, and to add to that, most if not all of the main vendors anyway, the ones I spoke about earlier, they're all fairly equal when it comes to zero touch deployment or provisioning. Being able to spin boxes up quickly, get them fully provisioned for operation. And so, that's a great point. Thanks for pointing that out, Johnny. This is a WAN project, just like any other WAN project, and you want to make sure you got all your ducks in a row. And so, just like other vendors, I'm sure we always do the crawl, walk, run type approach where, you want to make sure you get everything in order before you start rolling it out. And so I'll give you an example of that with one of our customers. It took them 3 months because they were very deliberate about it to get everything together. And they did this across 10 of their 1,200 sites. And so, once they were confident that they had the configuration correct, they rolled out 1,200 sites in 9 months. And so a testament to, zero touch deployment, it works. I mean, but that's just the right process, right? Very deliberate. I mean, you can do 10 sites in 2 weeks if you want, but they wanted to make sure that everything performed the way that they anticipated. And again, just because it's performing, 50 millisecond latency at one branch doesn't mean it's going to perform the same way, especially when you're talking about internet at another branch. So I don't know if I missed your question there. Let me know, and I'll try to redirect, but hopefully that answered it.
No, yeah, you both answered my questions. Yeah, it was sorry, I just had a hard time asking a question for some reason. Yeah, it was looking at some of the challenges that you guys go through, but also with the challenges that you do expect your customers to go through as well. So yeah, you both answered both of my questions. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Well, if nobody else has any additional questions, I guess we'll go ahead and close out tonight's session. Unfortunately, there's no beer in the cooler, so have to grab tonight. But I do want to say thanks to everybody from Fortinet for getting on the phone call or the WebEx and walking us through secure SD-WAN. Appreciate it. And of course, I'm sure Johnny and Stephen would be happy to give you their information if you'd like some additional information about what Fortinet can do, but or just in SD-WAN, secure SD-WAN in general. I'm sure they can also answer those questions. And we will have this presentation recorded tonight, so that'll be posted on the RISE website as well. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to post them on the forum, and we can try to get those answered for you as well. But with that, does anybody else have anything before we close out? Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you just one more time, just to make sure. Did I forget anything? You're the purveyor of all RISE.
No, I think you got everything. We'll get a blog article posted with the link to the video. We'll put the link to SDX Central up there too for everybody to check out. And Johnny, if you want to send me your info, we can post that up there as well. Don't forget B-Sides. And if you guys have any ideas, if you want to present at the upcoming meetings in May, drop us a line, info@roanokeinfosec.com. Or if you just have an idea and want to see if somebody else wants to present, throw that out. But we'd love to have more people presenting. So look forward to those ideas.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys spending a little time with us. Anyway, I'll just say thank you. We appreciate it, and hopefully we can get out there and do something in person when things loosen up. Everybody be safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.